Welcome to Aircraft, your gateway to thrilling HFY sci-fi stories where humanity stands strong among the stars. Here, you'll experience epic encounters with alien civilizations, moments of human courage, intelligence, and the unstoppable spirit that makes humanity unique. Every story on this channel is narrated by a real human voice, not AI, bringing you a more authentic and immersive storytelling experience. If you love sci-fi adventures and stories where humanity proves its worth in the universe, you're in the right place. Let's start the story.
There is a file in the Galactic Council's archive that has no access code, not a restricted code, not a classified code, no code at all, just a blank field where the authorization level should be, and beneath it, in the oldest formatting syntax the archive still supports, a single line of text that reads, "Do not retrieve. Do not reference. Do not confirm existence." Archivist candidate Velthraxis had worked in Sublevel 9 for 11 cycles before she found it. She almost didn't. The index was buried inside a deprecated cataloging system that hadn't been updated since before the 9th expansion, tucked between a decommissioned survey of pre-sentient mineral deposits in the Orcs cluster and a procedural log for a species that had gone extinct before Velthraxis' homeworld had developed agriculture. The kind of place you only find by accident. She was an accident-prone researcher. Her species, the Savari, perceived the world primarily through what her instructors at the Academy had taken to calling resonance mapping. Where most council species relied on light-based vision, the Savari built their understanding of space for vibration. Sound, pressure, the faint electromagnetic signatures that objects left in the air around them. Her 4 auditory membranes could read the emotional temperature of a room from across a corridor. She could hear the difference between a door that had been opened recently and one that hadn't been touched in a decade. The molecular settling, the micro-vibrations of hinges, the way a scholar hears a lie in a tone of voice. The file resonated wrong. That was the only way she could describe it. Every other record in the archive had a kind of settled quality, a deep stillness that came from years of being exactly where it was supposed to be. This file vibrated. Not physically. There was nothing to physically vibrate. But her membranes caught something at the edge of their range, something she had no better word for than wrongness, and she stopped, and she looked, and she found the blank authorization field staring back at her like an open wound that had been sewn shut with the wrong thread. She did not retrieve it. She wrote down the index string, closed the deprecated system, and went to find her cohort. The Academy's student wing existed in a state of what Velthraxis had come to understand as organized entropy. The 12 candidates currently enrolled in the archival studies track represented 9 different species, which meant 9 different relationships to concepts like personal space, acceptable ambient noise, and what constitutes a shared meal. The common room reflected all of this simultaneously. Prethkon, the eldest of them, a Daraki, broad-shouldered and covered in the pale, pressure-sensitive cilia that his species used for navigation, was reading 3 documents at once, one projected from each of his wrist-mounted displays. He processed information by immersion rather than sequence. His people found linearity somewhat offensive as an intellectual concept. Sarah Vasquez was eating something from a container that smelled, to Velthraxis' membranes, approximately the way she imagined the interior of an active engine compartment would smell. Velthraxis had cataloged 14 separate chemical compounds in the Academy cafeteria since Vasquez arrived 18 months ago. 3 of them had not previously been registered in the Council's database of consumable substances. Vasquez had eaten all 3 on purpose. The human looked up when Velthraxis came in. She had an unsettling talent for noticing things before they announced themselves. She'd explained once that her species had been persistence predators on their homeworld, which Velthraxis understood intellectually, but could not quite integrate emotionally. Prey animals did not become archival scholars. Prey animals did not eat engine fluid-adjacent condiments from battered containers and prop their feet on the furniture and look, somehow, like they owned every room they walked into. "You've got your membrane-flattened face," Vasquez said. "I have a face," Velthraxis said carefully. "I do not have a membrane-flattened face." "You do. Your top 2 membranes go flat when you're trying not to react to something." Vasquez set down the container. "What did you find?" Velthraxis told them. Prethkon put down all 3 documents. "That in itself, was alarming. She had never seen him voluntarily stop reading mid-session. His cilia shifted to the forward alert position, which in Dothraki body language signaled something between extreme interest and mild threat assessment. A sealed file with no authorization level, he said. In sub-level 9. Below the restricted stacks, Velthraxis confirmed. That's below the restricted stacks, Vasquez said. Yes, I just said that. No, I mean, Vasquez leaned forward. The restricted stacks are where they put the stuff that's classified. Below the restricted stacks is where they put the stuff that doesn't officially exist. The common room had gone quiet. Yunhei, Colossian, soft-bodied, translucent, with bioluminescent nodes along her primary trunk that shifted color with her emotional state, currently cycling between pale gold and agitated green, had stopped her own work and was listening from the adjacent alcove. Mreth, the only Govari in the cohort, had folded all 4 of his upper limbs in what Velthraxis recognized as the Govari posture of focused attention. What was the index string? Prethkon asked. Velthraxis read it from her notes. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence from the one before. Her membranes caught it, a subtle shift in the room's pressure, the kind that happened when multiple species with very different biologies all responded to the same stimulus in the same moment. Yunhei's nodes went white. That's a council epic marker, she said. Her voice was the soft, resonant hum the Colossians produced through a secondary throat structure. The 3rd digit. That's an epic marker from before the 7th expansion. Before the 7th expansion, Mreth repeated slowly, is before the current council membership charter. Before most of the current member species were admitted, Prethkon said. Vasquez had gone still in the way she sometimes did, which Velthraxis had learned to pay attention to. Most species displayed agitation through movement. Vasquez displayed focus through the absence of it. She became very, very quiet, and her eyes went somewhere that wasn't quite the room, and then she came back and said, "How old is that file?" Based on the epic marker, Velthraxis said, "At minimum 40,000 cycles." Another silence. "And it has no authorization code," Vasquez said. "No authorization code. Not classified. Not restricted. Not anything. Just no code." "Yes." Vasquez picked up her container of engine-smelling food, looked at it, put it back down. "I want to see it." They went back to sub-level 9 that evening, all 5 of them, Velthraxis, Vasquez, Prethkon, Yunhei, and Mreth, which was probably not the most subtle approach, but Vasquez had pointed out that a single researcher revisiting a specific index node was statistically more suspicious than a study group working late in the lower archive, which was both logical and the kind of logic that made Velthraxis's membranes hum with faint unease. The lower archive was not designed for comfort. It predated the current building's construction by about 8,000 cycles, and the infrastructure showed it. Lower ceilings, narrower corridors, the faint phosphorescent strip lighting that the oldest section still used because it required no active power draw. The air tasted different down here. Velthraxis's membranes red dust, inert polymers, the particular electromagnetic signature of data storage media that hadn't been accessed in a very long time. They found the index node. The blank authorization field stared at them. Prethkon examined it for a long time without touching anything, which was very on-brand for a Dothraki. His cilia moved in slow, methodical sweeps, the reading posture. "The file is present," he said. "The data exists. It has simply been removed from the retrieval system." "Can you get around that?" Vasquez asked. "The question is whether we should," Mreth said. His 4 upper limbs were folded again, but differently now, crossed rather than stacked, which meant something in Govari body language that Velthraxis hadn't fully decoded. Caution, she thought, or concern. Something was deliberately hidden from the archive by the council itself, Vasquez said, in a file that predates the current membership charter, with no authorization code attached, which means no one was supposed to even know it existed, let alone retrieve it. She looked at the blank field. The Academy trains archivists to recover information. That's literally the job. The job, Mreth said, is to recover information that the council designates recoverable. And yet, Vasquez gestured at the screen. Velthraxis's membranes caught the faint electromagnetic hum of the file's data package from half a meter away. Whatever it was dense. Not a procedural log. Not a survey. Something with narrative structure. The patterns were wrong for administrative record keeping. "It's a testimony," she said. Everyone looked at her. She pressed her membranes flat, focused, refined the reading. The data architecture. It's built for narrative record, not procedural. Someone wrote this as an account. A first-hand account. A testimony of what? Yunhei asked. Velthraxis could not answer that. But her membranes caught something else, something at the very edge of her range, something she had to strain to read. A secondary data tag, very old, overlaid on the file like a scar. It said, in the same ancient formatting syntax as the retrieval warning. Subject, Homo sapiens. Council Session 7841. Resolution 700. The room did not change. The phosphorescent strips continued their faint hum. Preethcon's cilia continued their slow sweep. Vasquez made a sound that Velthraxis had cataloged as a human laugh, except that it wasn't quite right. Shorter, flatter, the kind of sound that wasn't about something being funny. It's about humans, Vasquez said. Yes, Velthraxis said. And whatever happened in Council Session 7841. Yes. And you want to know why they buried it? I'm an archivist, Velthraxis said. Recovering buried things is, as you observe, the job. Vasquez looked at the screen for another moment. Then she said, pull it up. It took Preethcon 4 hours to reconstruct the retrieval pathway. He did not complain about this, which was either a sign of how interested he was or a sign that 4 hours was not, to a Daraki, a meaningful length of time. His species had a saying, Velthraxis had looked it up, that translated approximately as the correct answer is always worth the time it costs, and always costs less than the wrong one. Mreth had gone back to the student wing to sleep. Yunhei had stayed, her bioluminescent nodes cycling through soft, agitated colors in the phosphorescent dark. Vasquez had produced another container of something from somewhere in her coat, a different smell this time, something warm and sharp and faintly organic, and was eating it with the same total equanimity she brought to most situations. At hour 3, Velthraxis said, Can I ask you something? Sure, Vasquez said. Are you not concerned about what we might find? The human considered this. She had a particular quality to her consideration. Not the pause of someone uncertain, but the pause of someone deciding how much to say. I'm a little concerned, she said, but I'm more curious. The file specifically concerns your species. Yeah. Vasquez turned the container in her hands, which is honestly why I can't not look at it. Whatever they buried, whatever was important enough to put below the restricted stacks with no authorization code, it happened before humans were members of the council. Before humans were on the council's radar at all, if the date is right. So someone in the early council encountered humans. A pause, and then hid the record of it. That does not concern you. That concerns me enormously, Vasquez said. But concern and curiosity aren't opposites. She looked at Velthraxis. Your membranes are doing the flat thing again. I'm aware. Is it because you're worried about what we find, or because you're worried about what finding it means for us? Velthraxis pressed her membranes flat, deliberately this time, and held them there. The honest answer was both. The archival code was clear on the matter of sealed records. They were sealed for reasons, and the reasons were not always ones an archivist candidate had the standing to second-guess. Sublevel 9 existed precisely because there were things the council had determined should not be casually accessible. She had spent 11 cycles respecting that structure, but the file vibrated wrong, and the file was 40,000 cycles old, and it had no authorization code. And Vasquez was looking at her with that particular quality of human attention that her membranes read as not pressure, exactly, more like the electromagnetic signature of something at rest that could, if the conditions were right, move very fast. Both, Velthraxis admitted. Vasquez nodded, as if this was the correct answer. Me too, she said. The retrieval path opened at the beginning of the 4th hour. Preethcon stepped back from the console, his cilia fully extended in what Velthraxis had come to recognize as the Daraki equivalent of a held breath. It's accessible, he said. The file sat there, open, waiting. Velthraxis looked at Vasquez. Vasquez looked at the file. For the record, Vasquez said, if this turns out to be something catastrophically above our clearance level, I want it noted that the archivist found it first. Noted, Velthraxis said. Open it. Preethcon opened it. And the testimony of Speaker Sirun, senior delegate of the Mirati Cooperative, delivered before the Galactic Council in session 7841, filled the screen. The first line read, "I am writing this because someone must, and because the Council has voted to ensure that no official record survives. I am writing it in a format they will not think to look for. I am writing it because 43 cycles ago, I watched a species that should not exist do something that my civilization has no word for, and I've been trying to find a word ever since. Let me tell you about the humans." The testimony was written in Old Mirati, which none of them read fluently. Prethcon ran it through the archive's translation matrix, and they watched the ancient text resolve into standard script line by line. The way stars come into focus when a ship drops out of fold space, gradual, then all at once. It was 214 pages long. Velthraxis had estimated, from the resonance of the data package, that it was substantial. She had not estimated this substantial. 40,000 cycles ago, someone had sat down and written 214 pages of testimony that the Galactic Council had then voted to suppress, buried in a deprecated system below the restricted stacks, and attached a single line of instruction that amounted to, "Pretend this does not exist." Yunhei's bioluminescent nodes had gone a very steady, very pale amber, which in collisions indicated sustained emotional processing. "We are not going to read all of this tonight," she said. "No," Velthraxis agreed. "But we cannot leave it here and come back," Prethcon said. "If the archive's access logs are reviewed, and they may be reviewed now that the retrieval path was reconstructed, the file's activity signature will flag. We need a copy. Can you copy it without the flag propagating?" Vasquez asked. Prethcon's cilia moved in the lateral sweep that meant he was calculating. "If I detach the original file's identifier from the copy, yes, it will take another hour." "Do it," Vasquez said. She said it the same way she said most things, not loudly, not with particular emphasis, just with the quality of someone who had made a decision and moved on to implementation. Her species, Velthraxis had come to understand, was extraordinarily good at this. The gap between deciding and doing was, for humans, much smaller than it was for most species. The Mirati had a word for the paralysis that came from calculating consequences before acting, Sevthrak, roughly, the grief of the step not taken. In 11 months of watching Vasquez, Velthraxis had not once seen her experience Sevthrak. She was not sure if this was admirable or terrifying. Probably both. While Prethcon worked, Velthraxis read. The first humans arrived at Mirati Station 12 in what we now calculate as approximately 43 cycles before this writing, though my people did not know what they were when they came. We knew their ship. Everyone knew their ship. It had been drifting in the outer reach of the Cala system for 6 months, broadcasting on every frequency we had a receiver for, and several we did not. The Mirati Cooperative's border patrol intercepted the signal. The signal was, as best our linguists could determine, a greeting, not a distress call. A greeting from a ship that had clearly suffered catastrophic damage, was running on partial power, had lost 2 of its 3 propulsion systems, and was leaking atmosphere from at least one compromised section. They were greeting us. My colleague, Delegate Oraveth, may he rest in the long dark, was the first to suggest they might be dangerous. I remember his reasoning exactly. A species that greets you while dying is either supremely confident in its own survivability or supremely ignorant of the concept of survival. Either way, he said, approach with caution. We approached with caution. What I saw when the airlock cycled open is the image I have been trying to translate in a Mirati for 43 cycles. I do not think our language has the architecture for it. I will try anyway. There were 9 of them. They were smaller than I expected. I had read the initial survey reports, which described a bipedal species from a high-gravity death world, and I had imagined something physically imposing. They were not physically imposing. They were battered. 4 of the 9 were visibly injured. One of them had a wrapping of processed fiber around a section of its upper limb that had clearly been improvised from whatever material was available, and the wrapping was stained dark with what our biology team later confirmed was its own coagulated circulatory fluid. It was still standing. They were all standing. Their ship had been without sufficient power to maintain standard gravity for what our later analysis suggested was approximately 11 of their days. They had been awake, actively working for most of that time. One of them had not slept in 4 days. I know this because she told me when I asked her directly with the same tone of voice she might have used to report on the weather. She did not seem to think this was notable. I did not know what to do with that. Velfraxis stopped reading. Her membranes had flattened involuntarily, and she took a moment to process what she was doing, standing in the lower archive at the end of a fourth hour, reading the 40,000-cycle-old testimony of a Mirati delegate who had apparently also experienced the particular difficulty of knowing what to do with humans. Vasquez had come to stand beside her. She was reading the same section. For days without sleep, Vasquez said. Is that significant? Velfraxis asked. For most species, yes. For humans, Vasquez made a gesture that Velfraxis had cataloged as a shrug, meaning approximately it is what it is. 4 days is survivable. Painful, but survivable. You start hallucinating around day 5. But before that, you can still function. You can still function while hallucinating. People have. It's not recommended. A pause. It's also not, apparently, enough to stop us from repairing a ship. The delegate writes that she did not know what to do with that, Velfraxis said. Yeah, Vasquez's voice was quiet. I have that effect sometimes. The testimony went on. Speaker Setharun described bringing the 9 humans aboard Mirati Station 12. She described, with the careful precision of someone trained in diplomatic record-keeping, the way the humans had moved through the station, not with the wariness she had expected from a species encountering an alien environment for the first time, but with what she called a kind of terrible curiosity. They touched things. They looked at things. They asked questions in a language the translation matrix was still struggling with, and when the matrix failed them, they pointed and gestured and drew diagrams with their fingers on any flat surface available. One of them, the one with the improvised bandage, whose name Setharun eventually learned to approximate as Yusuf Adeyemi, sat down in the station's medical bay, allowed the Mirati medical staff to examine him, and spent the entire examination asking the medical staff questions about their own biology, not out of fear or to distract himself from the examination, out of genuine interest. The medical staff had not been prepared for this. We are trained, Setharun wrote, to deal with first contact situations. We have protocols. We have 17 distinct response frameworks, categorized by the encountered species' apparent technology level, physical threat assessment, and initial behavioral indicators. None of the frameworks had a category for encountered species is critically damaged, curious about everything, and appears not to have noticed that it should be frightened. Delegate Oroveth suggested that they might be performing confidence as a negotiating tactic. I considered this. The human in the medical bay was at that moment asking one of my physicians to explain, via the still incomplete translation matrix, why Mirati blood was iridescent. He was asking with the specific, focused attention of someone who genuinely wanted to know. His own blood was still seeping slowly through the improper bandage on his arm. It was not a negotiating tactic. It was just how they were. Prethcon looked up from the copying process. I am finding, he said, slowly, that I am having difficulty maintaining my place in the technical work. Because you're reading over Velfraxis' shoulder, Yunhei said. I am reading at a distance, Prethcon said with dignity. My cilia have an extended range. What part are you at? Vasquez asked. The medical base section. The curiosity. His cilia moved in a pattern Velfraxis had not cataloged before. I'm trying to determine whether I find this admirable or alarming. It can be both, Vasquez said. Yes, Prethcon said. I have found that it usually is. The humans stayed at Mirati Station 12 for 22 days while their ship was partially repaired. Setharun's testimony covered all 22 days in detail. Not the diplomatic detail of an official record, but the intimate, specific detail of someone who had spent 22 days watching something they couldn't look away from. She described the way the humans slept. This took up almost 3 pages, which initially seemed excessive and then didn't. I did not understand, initially, why my staff kept reporting the sleeping issue. We had provided them with appropriate rest facilities, temperature, and atmosphere calibrated to their biological requirements, as best our surveys could determine. The problem was not the facilities. The problem was that when humans sleep, they are completely inert. I do not mean this in the trivial sense. Most species, when resting, maintain some degree of sensory alertness. The Mirati maintain low-level electromagnetic sensitivity. Most species have some biological mechanism that keeps them partially aware of their environment while their primary consciousness processes. Humans do not. When humans sleep, they are simply absent. Their eyes close. Their sensory awareness drops, to near zero. They breathe slowly and make small, involuntary sounds and are, for all relevant purposes, defenseless in a way that even the most vulnerable species I have encountered do not permit themselves. My staff found this profoundly disturbing. Not because it was dangerous to us. We had no intention of harming them. But because it implied something about where humans had come from. A species that sleeps this way, this completely, with no defensive mechanism at all, is a species that had, at some point in its evolutionary history, been so thoroughly at the top of its food chain that it could afford to simply stop paying attention for 8 hours every night. Delegate Oroveth looked up the survey data on their homeworld. He did not sleep well for several days afterward. I read the survey data. I understood why. Vasquez had gone still. Velthraxis looked at her. The human's expression was the one she sometimes had when processing something she'd known intellectually, but was encountering differently than she expected. Not surprise, exactly. More like recognition from an unfamiliar angle. You already knew this, Velthraxis said carefully. About the sleep. I knew the science, Vasquez said. I didn't know someone had written it down like that. A pause. Like it was something worth noticing. Is it not? I never thought about it as, I just sleep. It's just something I do. She looked at the text. When you've lived with a thing your whole life, it's hard to see what it looks like from the outside. Her voice was steady. Her hands were still. But Velthraxis's membranes caught the faint shift in the room's electromagnetic temperature, the specific signature that living bodies produced when emotions moved through them without quite reaching the surface. She did not say anything. She returned to the text. The testimony shifted in tone around page 80. The first 79 pages had been, more or less, the careful documentation of confusion. Seth Varun describing human behavior, attempting to categorize it, reaching for frameworks, and finding them inadequate. The clinical language of a diplomat who was very good at her job and was encountering something her job had not prepared her for. Page 80 began differently. I am going to describe what happened on day 17 because I do not know how to describe it, and I have been trying for 43 cycles, and this is the closest I have come. On day 17, we received a distress signal from a collective freighter in the Callus Outer System. The freighter had been hit by debris from a micrometeorite field. Not catastrophic damage, but enough to rupture the cargo hold and strand two of the crew in a section that was losing atmosphere. The collective's nearest response vessel was 4 hours out. Mirity Station 12's response vessel was 2 hours out. We dispatched immediately. The humans asked to come. I do not know why I agreed. The protocol for first contact guests is explicit. They remain on the station during active operations. But the human who asked, their apparent leader, a woman named Tanaka, did not ask the way a guest requests permission. She asked the way a colleague offers to help. And before I had finished calculating the diplomatic ramifications of her presence on a response mission, she was already moving toward the docking bay. I followed her. The collective crew members were still alive when we reached them. Barely. The atmosphere in their section was at 8% of standard, low enough that any of my crew, in the time it would take to cut through the debris blocking the internal access route, would have been incapacitated within minutes. Tanaka looked at the atmospheric reading. She looked at the block drought. She looked at the atmospheric reading again. Then, she picked up the cutting tool, checked the seal on her suit's partial pressure assist, and said, and the translation matrix was still imperfect, so I cannot guarantee the precision of this. She said something that I have been rendering in Mirati as, I can hold my breath longer than that. She was in the debris field for 11 minutes. The official biological tolerance for a human in an 8% atmosphere, without oxygen supplementation, is somewhere between 4 and 6 minutes. I've looked this up. I looked it up at the time, and I looked it up afterward, and the number has not changed. She was in the debris field for 11 minutes. When she came out, she was carrying both collective crew members, one under each arm. She set them down, nodded at my medical team, and sat on the floor of the response vessel's cargo bay and breathed very hard for about 3 minutes. Then, she looked up and said again with the matrix's imperfect translation, something approximately like, the debris on the secondary route is cleared. You should mark it as accessible in your logs. The collective crew members survived. I stood there in the cargo bay for what I can only estimate was a very long time, watching Tanaka breathe, and I was not, there's a word in Mirati, fell Vaughn. It refers to the specific disorientation of a moment when the laws that govern the universe have not changed, but your understanding of what those laws permit has. I experienced Thelvon standing in that cargo bay. I have been experiencing it, in some degree, ever since. The common room of Sublevel 9 was very quiet. Yunhei's nodes had gone white again. Prethcon had stopped the copying process entirely. Mreth, who had at some point in the last 2 hours come back, was standing in the doorway, and Velthraxis wasn't sure when he'd arrived. Vasquez was reading the page again. Then she turned away and looked at the far wall, and there was a quality to her stillness that Velthraxis had not seen before. Not the focused stillness, not the decision-making stillness. Something quieter. 11 minutes, Prethcon said. The official tolerance is 4 to 6, Yunhei said. Yes, Prethcon said. No one said anything else for a moment. She delivered a status report. Mreth said finally. He had a slow, very precise voice, the Govari tendency toward structured speech. She was in an 8% atmosphere for 11 minutes, carrying 2 individuals, and when she came out, her first concern was providing accurate information for the navigation logs. Yes, Vasquez said. Her voice came from somewhere far away. That sounds right. Is that? Mreth paused. Is that a thing that humans simply do? A long silence. The practical part? Vasquez said. Mostly yes. You keep working. You update what needs updating. A pause. The 11 minutes is on the high end. Velthraxis looked at her. Her membranes were reading the room's electromagnetic field, and the room's electromagnetic field was currently doing something she had never cataloged before. All 5 of them, for species, vibrating at frequencies that were individually distinct and collectively producing something that felt, if she had to describe it, like a chord. Not harmonious, exactly, but not discordant. Something more complex than either. What happened after day 17? Mreth asked. Velthraxis looked back at the screen. I don't know yet, she said. But I think this is where the testimony changes. She was right. The testimony of Speaker Severun did not describe the Galactic Council session until page 141. The first 140 pages were something else entirely. A portrait constructed with the careful obsession of someone who had decided that if she was going to try to explain humanity to whatever future reader might eventually break through the archive suppression, she was going to do it right. 22 days of observation, 43 cycles of reflection, 214 pages of a diplomat who had been changed by something and was trying with everything she had to explain exactly what the something was. They read through the night. Velthraxis's membranes mapped the room's shifting temperatures as the hours passed. The way attention changed the electromagnetic signature of space, the way focus and fatigue and something she couldn't quite name built up in the recycled air until it had a texture to it, warm and specific. Mreth made tea using a portable heating element he'd brought from somewhere. Yunhei's nodes cycled through colors she didn't seem aware of. Prethcon stopped pretending to finish the copy and simply read. Vasquez sat on the floor with her back against the storage unit, the screen tilted toward her, and read without speaking. Velthraxis read beside her and cataloged the moments when Vasquez's breathing changed. Seferinch wrote about music on page 93. She had heard it coming from the quarters the station had assigned to humans, a thin, high sound, recognizable in retrospect as what humans called singing, though at the time the Mirati staff had flagged it as an anomalous acoustic phenomenon and sent a maintenance crew to check for malfunctioning equipment. The maintenance crew had found one of the 9 humans, a young one, Seferin wrote, who had given them a name that translated approximately as Mira Kowalski, sitting cross-legged on her sleeping platform, making the sound on purpose. I asked Tanaka later what the singing was for. I phrased this as a practical question because I was still, at that stage, trying to approach everything as a practical question. She said it was a song. I said, yes, but what is it for? She looked at me for a moment. Then, she said, Kowalski's scared. She does this when she's scared. I said, does it help? Tanaka said, not in any way I can measure. But she does it anyway. I thought about this for a long time afterward. The distinction she was drawing between things that help in ways that can be measured and things that humans do anyway. I think that distinction is, in some fundamental sense, the key to understanding what they are. Every civilization I have encountered optimizes. We do things because they work. We stop doing things when they stop working. Even our art, our rituals are expressions of culture. They serve functions. Social cohesion, genetic signaling, historical transmission. Human creativity does not seem to operate by this logic. I watched them over those 22 days, and I found humans who drew images in the condensation on the station's windows. Humans who told each other stories before sleeping, fictional stories about things that had never happened and never would. Humans who made each other laugh in the middle of crisis situations with no apparent goal beyond the laughter itself. Humans who, when they had a few hours of rest, would sit together and make sound, music, not because it had any structural purpose, but because the sound itself was, I do not have a word. My language does not have the word. The humans said it was beautiful, and when I asked them what beautiful meant, they said it was the feeling of something being worth experiencing for its own sake. And when I asked them how you measured that, they said you didn't. You just knew. This was deeply unsatisfying to me. I've been thinking about it for 43 cycles. I think now that this might be the most human thing I ever witnessed. Not the 11 minutes in the debris field. Not the healing that should not have been possible. Not the loyalty, the stubbornness, the refusal to be reasonable in the face of odds that reason could not argue with. The fact that they make things. The fact that they make things that serve no function, that cannot be measured, that exist solely because the making felt worth doing. A species that can do that can look at a universe that does not care about them and respond by making something beautiful, is a species that scares me more than any weapon system I have encountered. Not because of what they can destroy, because of what they can create. Vasquez put the screen down. She put it down carefully, not the way you put something down when you're done with it, but the way you put something down when you need your hands to be empty for a moment. Are you? Velthraxis started. I'm fine, Vasquez said. She sounded like she was telling the truth. I'm fine. That's just, she stopped. No one's ever described it like that before. To me, in something I was reading, she looked at the screen. We've always been the ones on the outside looking in, looking at other things and saying, this is beautiful, this is worth the making. I didn't know someone had looked at us and said it back. The room was very quiet. Retha's tea was cooling in its container. Yinhei's nodes were a color Velthraxis didn't have a name for, something between amber and green, something that felt warm. Prethcon's cilia had gone very, very still. Velthraxis did not say anything. She picked up the screen, found her place, and kept reading. The council session happened because of what Tanaka did after day 22. The humans left when their ship was repaired. Sethrun described the departure in 3 sentences, terse and oddly formal compared to the intimate specificity of everything before it, the way diplomats write when they're managing an emotion they don't want to record. But before they left, Tanaka had asked to speak with Sethrun privately. She thanked me. This is not unusual. Departing guests customarily express gratitude. What was unusual was what she said after the gratitude. She said, I want you to know that we'll remember this. I said something diplomatic. She waited for me to finish, and then she said, more slowly, no, I mean, we'll remember you. My people, Umans. We remember who helped us. I did not know how to respond to this. She said, I know that's probably not how it works out here. I know you probably have protocols and procedures and ways of classifying what we are and what we mean to the council's existing frameworks. But I wanted you to know, before we go back to doing whatever comes next, that we remember. And then she left. I filed my report. I included the biological anomalies, the first contact behavioral documentation, the incident on day 17. I recommended the Mirati Cooperative initiate formal contact with humanity and present them to the council as a candidate species for observation status. I did not include in the official report the way that conversation felt. The Mirati language, as I have noted, does not have the architecture for it. The report reached the council 3 cycles later. Sethrun was summoned to present it in person. This was standard procedure for first contact reports with significant behavioral findings. Session 7841 was scheduled. She stood before the full council and gave a condensed version of what she had documented. They listened well. They asked precise questions. They requested the biological data, the behavioral data, the threat assessment models. Then, they asked for my recommendation. I said, observation status, with an expedited pathway to associate membership if subsequent contact supported it. There was a pause. Delegate Rorith of the Veth Assembly. I will not pretend to have any warmth for Delegate Rorith said. On the basis of what? A ship of 9 individuals who survived an incident that other species would not have survived displayed behavioral patterns inconsistent with the majority of observed sentient species, and said they would remember who helped them? I said yes. On the basis of exactly that. Rorith said, those are not qualifications for council membership. Those are risk factors. I said, explain. And he did. The explanation took 12 pages. Seth Varun had recorded it in full, with the meticulous fidelity of someone who wanted to make absolutely certain that what was said in that session could not, at some later point, be argued to have meant something else. Delegate Rorith had been thorough. He laid out the case with precision. I will give him that. The biological data was undeniable. A species from a Class 12 death world, with the evolutionary heritage of a persistence predator, capable of operating past the point where most species would be incapacitated, healing in ways that should not be possible, consuming substances toxic to the majority of known life forms. The behavioral data compounded this. A species that formed emotional bonds with entities it had known for hours. A species that acted in self-destructive ways on behalf of strangers. A species that, when confronted with the impossible, did not recalculate its options. It simply tried the impossible anyway. Rorith said, this is a species that does not process risk the way rational beings process risk. He said, this is a species that wins fights it should lose. He said, this is a species that is loyal to a degree that has no tactical upper limit, meaning there is no point at which they will assess a situation and decide that loyalty is no longer worth the cost. He said, this is a species that creates things for no functional purpose, which means it has internal drive states that cannot be predicted or modeled by standard behavioral frameworks. He said, we have no tools for them. He said, and a species for which we have no tools, which come from a death world, which does not stop, which remembers that species is not a candidate for observation status. He said, that species is a variable we cannot account for. And a variable we cannot account for, in a system we have spent 10,000 cycles building to be stable and predictable and at peace. He left the sentence unfinished. He didn't need to finish it. The vote was 41-9. Humanity was not refused membership. They were not declared hostile. They were not officially classified as anything at all. The council simply voted to ensure that no formal first contact record would exist. No report. No behavioral documentation. No recommendation. No session record. Humans would remain, officially, an uncontacted species. They would remain unknown. They would remain outside the council's framework, which meant outside the council's concern, which meant, and Rorith was careful not to say this out loud, but the mathematics of it were clear. If something happened to them, there would be no obligation to respond. If something happened to their world, their system, their species, the council would not be required to notice. I voted against. I was one of the 9. I am writing this because 43 cycles ago, a woman named Tanaka told me that humans remember who helped them. I want the record to exist. I want someone someday to find it. I want humans to know that they were seen. And I want the council to know that I saw them. Speaker, Sivarin, Miriti Cooperative Cycle 7841, 3rd month, Day 40. The archive was very quiet. The phosphorescent strips hummed. Somewhere in the upper levels, the ventilation system cycled through its nightly maintenance routine, and the sound came down to them as a low, irregular breath, the building moving air through itself the way any living thing does while it sleeps. No one spoke for a long time. Velthraxis's membranes were doing the flat thing. She knew it. She let them. Reth had set down his tea container somewhere in the last 30 pages and hadn't picked it up again. Prethcon's cilia were extended full length, oriented toward the screen, the posture her people used when they needed to process something and had not yet found the architecture to do it in. Yunhei's nodes were cycling slowly through colors that Velthraxis had no names for, the soft, repeating gradient of a being working through something that had no easy shape. Vasquez was looking at the floor. 40,000 cycles, she said finally. No one responded. The words didn't require a response. They banned us from the record. Not from the galaxy, we were already there. Not from their space, they couldn't exactly fence us out. From the record, from existing, officially, in their framework. A pause. Because we were a variable they couldn't account for. Because they were afraid, Preth Khan said. He said it plainly, without judgment. Not of what humans were, of what they could not predict humans would become. Is there a difference? Preth Khan considered. I think there might be. Velthraxis looked at the last page of the testimony. Seth Varun's closing line, translated out of 40,000 cycle-old Mirati into standard script, sitting at the bottom of 214 pages like a stone dropped in still water. I want humans to know that they were seen. She thought about the 9 humans on a damaged ship, broadcasting greetings on every frequency. She thought about Adeyemi asking a Mirati physician why alien blood was iridescent, while his own blood soaked through an improvised bandage. She thought about Tanaka in an 8% atmosphere for 11 minutes and coming out and asking that the navigation logs be updated. She thought about Kowalski, scared, making sound because the making felt worth doing even when it couldn't be measured. She thought about a council of 41 delegates looking at all of this and voting to make it disappear. What do we do with it? Yunhei asked. Her nodes had settled, finally, into a steady amber. No one answered immediately. This was the question the whole night had been moving toward, and it did not have an easy shape. The council has current human liaison protocols, Mreth said slowly. Humanity joined the associate membership track, officially 8,000 cycles ago. They have a seat. They have representation. Whatever Rorith's vote accomplished, it didn't hold forever. It held for 32,000 cycles, Preth Khan said. Yes, Mreth said. It did. In those 32,000 cycles, Velthraxis said, humanity grew, expanded, developed, made contact with species on their own, without council introduction. She paused, became exactly the variable Rorith was afraid of, because Vasquez said, you can't actually stop a species that doesn't stop. She said it without pride, without emphasis. The same way she said most things, just the statement flat and certain, the way you say something you've known for so long it no longer occurs to you that it might need explaining. Velthraxis's membranes caught something in the electromagnetic field of the room, not the cord from earlier, something less complex and more definite, the specific signature of a decision being made. We file it, Velthraxis said. Everyone looked at her, properly, with a full authorization framework. We reconstruct the retrieval pathway so it can be accessed by any council archivist with standard clearance. We document our discovery, the date, the condition of the file, the translation process. She looked at the screen. We make it part of the official record, the way Seth Varun wanted it to be. The council may not be pleased, Mreth said. The council, Velthraxis said, has a human delegate, and a Mirati delegate, and a Colossian delegate, and a Govari delegate, and a Daraki delegate. The vote in session 7,841 was 41-9. I don't know what the vote would be today, but it would not be the same vote. No, Preth Khan agreed. It would not. Vasquez was looking at Velthraxis. Her expression was the one that Velthraxis had learned. Over 11 months of proximity meant that the human was weighing something she was not going to say out loud. What? Velthraxis asked. Nothing, Vasquez said. Just, you're doing the thing. What thing? The thing where you make a decision and move to implementation. A pause. You sound a little bit like Tanaka. Velthraxis pressed her membranes flat, held them there. Let the sensation pass. I am an archivist, she said finally. Recovering buried things is the job. Yeah, Vasquez said. It is. They filed the record on a Tuesday, which was a human concept of time that had somehow propagated through the council's administrative calendar in ways no one could fully account for, because humans have been suggesting improvements to administrative systems since they'd arrived, and most of the suggestions were, frustratingly, good. The filing generated a response within 36 hours, which was fast by council standards. The response came from the Office of Historical Records, and it was 3 pages of densely formatted bureaucratic language that, when Velthraxis translated it from administrative standard, said approximately, "We are aware of this document. We request a meeting to discuss appropriate classification." Below that, forwarded from the Mirati Cooperative's current council representative, was a single line, "We have been waiting for someone to find that file for 40 cycles. Thank you." And below that, forwarded from a human delegation's office, from a senior diplomat whose name Velthraxis recognized from the current council proceedings roster, was something that was not a diplomatic communication at all. It was 4 sentences. We heard what Sephirin wrote. We heard that she saw us. Please tell the archivist who found the file that humans remember who sees them. 2. We always have. Velfraxis read this 3 times. Her membranes were doing the flat thing. She forwarded it to Vasquez, who read it, said nothing, and then went to the window of the student wing's common room and stood there for a while, looking at the star field visible through the Academy's viewport. The vast, cold, specific dark of a galaxy that was improbably and stubbornly full of life that kept finding ways to see each other across the distance. Velthraxis did not disturb her. She had learned, over 11 months, that sometimes the most human response to a thing was simply to stand in the presence of it, and breathe, and let it be as large as it actually was. She had been learning to do that, too. It was, she thought, not a bad way to process the universe. Not a bad way at all.